We don't hire people who might scare our customers. The restaurant manager tells 82-year-old Thomas Mitchell while pointing at the burn scars covering half his face. The crowded diner falls silent as other job applicants stare, unaware that the trembling hands adjusting his worn baseball cap once carried wounded soldiers through enemy fire in Vietnam. What happens next will leave you speechless. Drop a comment below about a veteran who changed your life. And smash that subscribe button because stories like Thomas's deserve to be heard by millions, not just thousands. Thomas Mitchell had been looking for work for 3 months. At 82, most places turned him away before he even filled out an application. But today felt different. The Golden Spoon Diner had a help wanted sign, and Thomas needed this job badly. His small pension barely covered rent and medicine. The burns on his face made people uncomfortable, but he was willing to work hard. He just needed someone to give him a chance. The manager, a heavy-set man named Rick, looked Thomas up and down when he walked in. Other people waiting for interviews whispered and pointed at Thomas's scars. The skin on the left side of his face was twisted and red, a permanent reminder of events he rarely talked about. Thomas took a seat and waited his turn. A young woman next to him moved to a different chair. A mother pulled her child closer when they walked past. Thomas kept his eyes down, used to the stares by now. When Rick called his name, Thomas stood slowly. His knees ached, but he walked straight and proud to the manager's office. Rick didn't ask him to sit down. Instead, he crossed his arms and shook his head. "We don't hire people who might scare our customers," Rick said loud enough for everyone in the waiting area to hear. Thomas felt his face burn with shame. "Sir, I'm a hard worker. I just need a chance." Rick laughed and looked back toward the other applicants. "Look at yourself, old man. Those scars would make people lose their appetite. I can't have that in my restaurant." The waiting area went completely quiet. Thomas could feel everyone staring. A teenager with his phone out seemed to be recording. Thomas's hands started shaking, but he tried one more time. "Please, sir, I really need this job. I can work in the back where no one would see me." Rick's voice got louder. "Are you deaf?" I said no. "We want normal-looking people here, not some burned-up old guy who probably can't even carry a tray without dropping it." Some people in the waiting area laughed. Others looked away, embarrassed. Thomas felt smaller with each word. He had faced enemy fire, carried wounded men to safety, and survived things most people couldn't imagine. But right now, he felt defeated. The worst part came when Rick turned to the other job seekers and said, "See what I mean? We run a family restaurant here. Kids come in all the time. We can't have someone who looks like a monster working here." Thomas's chest tightened. The word monster hit him like a punch. He had heard it before, whispered behind his back at the grocery store or the doctor's office, but never said so directly to his face. A young mother in the corner nodded in agreement. "I wouldn't bring my kids here if he worked here," she said. Children shouldn't have to see that. Thomas wanted to leave, but his legs felt heavy. He stood there as Rick continued his cruel speech about maintaining standards and keeping customers comfortable. The manager seemed to enjoy having an audience for his cruelty. "You should try the circus," Rick said with a mean smile. "They probably need people who look like you." More laughter from some of the waiting applicants. Thomas felt tears building in his eyes, something that rarely happened anymore. He had cried when his wife died 5 years ago, but not much since then. Rick wasn't finished. "How did you even get those scars anyway? Fell asleep smoking? House fire? Let me guess, you were probably drunk and did something stupid." Thomas finally found his voice. "No, sir, it wasn't like that." "Then what?" Rick demanded, enjoying his power over the old man. Thomas straightened his shoulders slightly. "I was serving my country in Vietnam." Rick laughed even louder. "Oh, please. Every old guy claims he was in Vietnam when he needs sympathy. What's next? Are you going to tell me you were some kind of war hero? The cruel laughter from Rick and some of the applicants filled the small office area. Thomas felt his heart racing. He rarely talked about his service, but these people were treating him like he was lying. Rick looked around at his audience. These old-timers all have the same sob story. Vietnam this, Vietnam that. Half of them probably never left their hometown. Thomas reached slowly into his jacket pocket. His fingers found the small blue case he always carried. He had never shown it to strangers before, never used it to prove anything. But something about Rick's cruelty and the public humiliation made him act differently than usual. Without saying a word, Thomas pulled out the Medal of Honor case and set it gently on Rick's desk. The room went completely silent. Rick's smile disappeared as he stared at the distinctive blue ribbon and gold star. Everyone in the waiting area craned their necks to see what had changed the mood so suddenly. Rick picked up the case with shaking hands. His face went white as he read the inscription. Thomas J. Mitchell, Medal of Honor, Republic of Vietnam, 1969. Thomas spoke quietly. I got these scars pulling 7 wounded soldiers out of a burning helicopter that crashed in enemy territory. I went back 3 times because I couldn't leave anyone behind. The fuel caught fire on my last trip out. Rick's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The waiting area was so quiet you could hear the coffee maker bubbling in the corner. Thomas continued. I spent 8 months in a hospital. The doctors said I was lucky to survive. My wife stood by me through all the surgeries and skin grafts. She never once called me a monster. A middle-aged man in the waiting area stood up and quietly removed his baseball cap. Then another person stood. Within seconds, everyone in the room was on their feet, except Rick, who sat frozen behind his desk. The young mother, who had agreed about not bringing her children, looked like she wanted to disappear. The teenager who'd been recording put his phone away and stared at the floor. Thomas carefully took the Medal of Honor case back from Rick's trembling hands. He looked around the room at all the standing people, then back at the manager. I don't want to work here anymore, Thomas said simply. A place that treats people this way isn't somewhere I'd want to spend my time. He turned and walked toward the door. The crowd parted to let him through. As he reached for the handle, the middle-aged man who had stood first called out, "Sir, wait please." Thomas stopped and turned around. The man walked over with tears in his eyes. My father served in Vietnam too. He never came home. I want to shake your hand, sir. Thomas nodded and shook the man's hand. Then others began approaching. The teenager apologized for recording. An elderly woman thanked him for his service. Even some of the job applicants who had laughed earlier now looked ashamed. Rick remained seated at his desk, staring at the Medal of Honor case impression still visible on the wood, where Thomas had placed it. As Thomas finally left the Golden Spoon Diner, he could hear Rick trying to call him back, probably realizing the terrible mistake he had made. But Thomas kept walking. 3 days later, Thomas received a phone call from the owner of Morrison's Fine Dining across town. Word had spread about what happened at the Golden Spoon. The owner, a Marine veteran himself, offered Thomas a job as a host with full benefits and the respect he deserved. Thomas worked at Morrison's for 2 years, before finally retiring for good. The customers loved talking with him, and children were fascinated by his stories about helicopters and faraway places. His scars became conversation starters rather than sources of shame. Rick's restaurant closed down 6 months later. The story of how he treated a Medal of Honor recipient had spread through social media and the local community. People stopped coming, and his business never recovered. Thomas kept the Medal of Honor case in his pocket every day until he passed away peacefully at age 84. At his funeral, hundreds of people came to honor the man who had saved 7 lives in Vietnam and continued to touch hearts for decades afterward. The lesson Thomas taught that day at the Golden Spoon lives on. Never judge someone by their scars, because you never know what battles they fought or what courage lies beneath the surface.